Hi, my name's Alexander Davis. 6 months ago, my wife walked out on me from my best friend Derek, left me standing in our living room with divorce papers and a smirk on her face. She said I was too comfortable, that Derek made her feel alive again. They moved into a luxury condo downtown while I slept on an air mattress in my brother's basement. But here's what she didn't know. I wasn't just grieving. I was planning. 3 months later, I accepted a job offer that seemed too strange to be real, working for a reclusive tech investor who never left his penthouse. That job led me to discover who orchestrated my downfall and why. And when I walked into that courtroom last week, watching Derek's face drain of color as the judge read the transfers, my ex-wife finally understood. Comfortable doesn't mean powerless. It means patient. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. They told me marriage was about compromise, but nobody mentioned it could be about replacement. The dinner party was supposed to be a celebration. Our 5th anniversary, 12 of our closest friends gathered around the mahogany table in our dining room. I'd spent 3 days preparing, marinating the lamb, selecting wines I couldn't really afford, making sure every detail reflected the life we'd built together. Isabella sat at the far end of the table, her laughter ringing through the room like wind chimes in a storm, beautiful but slightly off-key. Derek sat 2 chairs down from her, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been my best man, who'd helped us move into this house, who knew every corner of our life because we'd invited him into it. He raised his glass for a toast, his voice smooth and practiced. To Alex and Isabella, 5 years of building something real. The room erupted in applause and clinking glasses. I smiled, lifted my wine, and caught the briefest flicker of something pass between them. A glance that lasted half a second too long. A smile that carried weight I couldn't name. The rest of the evening blurred. Conversations about work, vacation plans, the new restaurant downtown that everyone wanted to try. Isabella excused herself twice to take phone calls, standing in the hallway just out of sight. Derek followed her with his eyes each time, then looked away when he noticed me watching. By 11, the guests had filtered out, leaving behind empty bottles and half-eaten desserts. Isabella disappeared into the bedroom without a word. I stayed in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes, trying to shake the unease that had settled into my chest like fog. The next morning, she was already dressed when I woke up, not in her usual weekend clothes, jeans and a sweater, but in the black dress she wore to important meetings. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair was pulled back tight. She stood at the foot of the bed holding a manila envelope, and I knew before she said a word that everything was about to collapse. "I'm leaving," she said. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this in front of a mirror. "I've been unhappy for a long time, Alex. You're a good person, but you're too comfortable. You stopped trying. You stopped making me feel anything." I sat up slowly, the sheets tangled around my legs. "What are you talking about? We just celebrated our anniversary." She shook her head. "That's exactly the problem. You go through the motions. You make the dinner, you buy the wine, you smile at the right moments. But there's nothing underneath it. You're so focused on maintaining stability that you forgot to actually live." I stared at her, searching for the woman I'd married, the one who used to laugh at my terrible jokes, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movies. She wasn't there. In her place stood someone cold, someone who'd already left long before this conversation. Then she said it, the words that turned confusion into devastation. "I'm moving in with Derek. We've been seeing each other for 8 months. He makes me feel alive again." The room tilted. My stomach dropped like I'd stepped off a cliff. Derek, my best friend. The guy who'd sat in this house 24 times, who'd eaten meals I'd cooked, who'd looked me in the eye and asked how I was doing. 8 months. She dropped the envelope on the bed. "Divorce papers. I've already signed them. My lawyer will contact you next week about dividing assets." She turned toward the door, then paused. "I really hope you find someone who fits your version of life, Alex. You deserve that. But I deserve more." She walked out. I heard her heels on the hardwood floor, the front door opening and closing, her car starting in the driveway. Then silence. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, staring at the envelope. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother, Joshua. "Hey man, heard about you and Isabella. You okay? Need a place to crash?" I didn't remember telling him. Then another text, this one from my cousin. So sorry about the split, let me know if you need anything. My hands started shaking. I opened social media. Isabella had already changed her relationship status. In a relationship with Derek Connors. The post was an hour old. It already had 37 likes. The comments rolled in like waves. About time, someone wrote. You two are perfect together. Another said, Alex was always too boring for you anyway. I closed the app, but the damage was done. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from friends, acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all offering sympathy that felt more like pity. I called Derek. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same result. Then a text came through from his number. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We didn't plan this, it just happened. Move on. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Screen cracked, but still lit. I wanted to scream, to break something, to do anything that would make the hollowness in my chest feel like something other than emptiness. Instead, I packed a bag. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, a few books. I left the envelope on the bed, unopened. I wasn't ready to see the details of how my life was being dismantled. Joshua lived in Hartfield, a small town 40 minutes north. His apartment was above a bakery, 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors that creaked when you walked. He opened the door before I even knocked, took one look at my face and stepped aside. You can stay as long as you need, he said. The first week passed in a haze. I slept on an air mattress in his spare room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 5 years, searching for the signs I'd missed. Isabella's late nights at work, the way she stopped asking about my day, the distance that had grown so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was a canyon between us. Derek's increasing presence in our lives. The way he always seemed to know what Isabella wanted before I did. Joshua didn't push me to talk. He made coffee in the mornings, left dinner in the fridge when he went out, and gave me space to fall apart quietly. By the second week, reality started pressing in. Bills. The mortgage on the house was in both our names, but I'd been the one making payments for the past year. Insurance, utilities, car payments, all of it tied to accounts I no longer had access to. Isabella had frozen our joint account the day she left. My personal savings, modest at best, wouldn't last more than 2 months. I called my boss, told him I needed a few days off. He was understanding, sympathetic even, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Take the time you need, Alex. Just keep me posted. I knew what that meant. Take too long, and there wouldn't be a job to come back to. I tried calling Derek again. This time he answered. His voice was flat, defensive. What do you want, Alex? I don't know, I said. An explanation. An apology. Something that makes this make sense. He sighed. Look, I didn't plan for this to happen. Neither did Isabella. But feelings don't follow rules. We tried to fight it, but we couldn't. And honestly, you two weren't working. You had to see that. I felt the anger rise, hot and sharp. You were my best friend. You sat in my house. You looked me in the eye. He cut me off. I know. And I'm sorry. But being sorry doesn't change what happened. We've moved on. You should too. The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the air mattress, phone in hand, and felt the weight of it all crash down. I'd lost my wife, my best friend, my home, and my sense of who I was in the span of 2 weeks. The humiliation wasn't just private. It was public, broadcasted across social media, whispered about in group chats I wasn't part of. I was the punchline to a joke I hadn't known was being told. That night I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through job listings, desperate for anything that might give me a foothold. Most required experience I didn't have or paid less than what I needed to survive. Then, buried in the 3rd page of results, I found something strange. Private assistant needed. Discretion required. High compensation. No experience necessary. Serious inquiries only. The listing was vague, almost suspicious. But desperation has a way of making you ignore red flags. I clicked the link and sent my resume before I could talk myself out of it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The response came faster than I expected. An email arrived at 6 in the morning, 3 sentences long. Thank you for your inquiry. Interview scheduled for 2 p.m. today at the following address. Punctuality is non-negotiable. The address was in Ashton Heights, the kind of neighborhood where houses had names instead of numbers and driveways disappeared behind iron gates. I borrowed Joshua's car, a dented sedan that wheezed when you pushed it past 50, and arrived 15 minutes early. The building was a sleek glass tower, 30 floors of tinted windows reflecting the pale autumn sky. No business name on the entrance, just a number and a keypad. I pressed the buzzer. A woman's voice crackled through the speaker. Name? Alexander Davis. I'm here for an interview. A pause. Top floor. Elevator code is 7743. The door clicked open. Inside, the lobby was cold and minimal. Polished marble floors, no furniture, no decorations. Just an elevator with brushed steel doors. I entered the code. The elevator rose smoothly, silently, and when the doors opened, I stepped into a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, furniture in shades of gray and white, everything precise, untouched, sterile. A man stood near the windows, his back to me. He didn't turn when I entered. Alexander Davis, he said. His voice was low, measured. Tell me why you're here. I hesitated. I need a job. He turned slowly. He was older than I expected, maybe late 50s, with silver hair and sharp features that looked like they'd been carved from stone. His eyes were pale gray, unsettling in their intensity. That's not what I asked. I asked why you're here. I swallowed hard. Because my wife left me for my best friend. Because I lost everything. Because I don't have anywhere else to go. He studied me for a long moment, then gestured to a chair. Sit. I sat. He remained standing. My name is Victor Grayson. I run a private investment firm. I don't do interviews. I don't post job listings. And I don't hire people who are simply desperate. I hire people who've been broken in specific ways. People who understand loss, betrayal, and the mechanics of trust. You fit a profile I've been looking for. I frowned. What profile? Someone whose life recently fell apart in a very public way. Someone whose pain is visible enough to be useful. The words sent a chill through me. Useful for what? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That depends on whether you accept the position. The job is simple. You'll live here, manage my schedule, handle correspondence, and maintain discretion about everything you see and hear. In exchange, you'll be paid more than you've ever made, and you'll have access to resources that will help you rebuild your life. But there are rules. You don't ask questions. You don't leave without permission. And you don't tell anyone where you are or what you're doing. I should have walked out. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that no legitimate job came with these conditions. But desperation is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the part of your brain that knows better. How much are we talking? I asked. He named a figure. Monthly. It was more than I'd made in 6 months at my old job. I stared at him. Why me? Because you're exactly what I need, he said. Someone who's lost everything and has nothing left to protect. Someone who'll follow instructions because the alternative is worse. Someone who understands that power isn't about what you have. It's about what you're willing to do to get it back. He slid a contract across the table. It was 10 pages long, dense with legal language I didn't fully understand, sections about non-disclosure, non-compete clauses, arbitration agreements. My hands shook as I flipped through it. At the bottom of the last page was a line for my signature. Sign it, and your life changes today, Victor said. Walk away. And you go back to that air mattress in your brother's apartment, wondering how long it'll be before you're completely broke. I picked up the pen. I should have read every word. I should have called a lawyer, asked questions, demanded clarity. Instead, I signed my name and dated it. Victor took the contract, folded it, and tucked it into his jacket. "Welcome aboard, Alexander. Your room is down the hall. First door on the right. Your belongings will be retrieved from your brother's apartment tomorrow." I stood, legs unsteady. "How did you know where I was staying?" He smiled again. That same cold, calculated smile. "I know a lot of things, Alexander. That's why you're here." He turned back to the windows, dismissing me without another word. I walked down the hallway, found the room he'd mentioned, and stepped inside. It was larger than Joshua's entire apartment. King-sized bed, private bathroom, a desk with a new laptop already set up. The closet was stocked with clothes in my exact size. Suits, casual wear, shoes, everything I'd need. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room. I looked like a stranger. Hollow eyes, tight jaw, shoulders slumped under the weight of choices I didn't fully understand. That night, I barely slept. The penthouse was too quiet. No street noise, no neighbors, just the faint hum of climate control and the occasional creak of the building settling. I kept replaying Victor's words. Someone whose pain is visible enough to be useful. What did that mean? Useful for what? But exhaustion eventually dragged me under, and when I woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. A note had been slipped under my door. Schedule attached. Follow it precisely. Today you begin. The schedule was meticulous. 6 a.m., wake up. 6:30, breakfast preparation. 7 a.m., morning briefing. 8 a.m., correspondence review. It continued like that, every hour accounted for, until 11 p.m., when I was expected to retire. I found Victor in the main room, seated at a glass desk, typing on a laptop. He didn't look up when I entered. "Good morning," I said. He nodded. "Your first task is simple. I need you to research someone. Full background, financials, social connections, legal history, everything." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a photograph and a name, Derek Connors. My stomach dropped. I stared at the photo. It was Derek, smiling at the camera, arm around Isabella at some event I didn't recognize. I looked up at Victor. "Why?" "Because I told you to," he said. "And because if you want to understand why you're here, you'll start by understanding who he is." My hands tightened on the folder. "This doesn't make sense. You said you hire people who've been broken in specific ways. What does Derek have to do with anything?" Victor finally looked at me, his gray eyes piercing. "Everything, Alexander. He has everything to do with why you're standing in this room. Now get to work." I took the folder and walked back to my room, hands shaking. I opened the laptop and started searching. Derek's social media, public records, business filings. The more I dug, the stranger things became. Derek worked for a consulting firm, but the firm had no website, no client list, no public presence. His financials showed income that didn't match his supposed salary, properties in his name that he shouldn't have been able to afford. And then I found it. Buried in a property record from 2 years ago. A transfer of ownership for a luxury condo in downtown Ashton Heights. The seller's name was listed as Victor Grayson. The buyer was Derek Connors. I sat back, heart pounding. Victor owned the condo where Derek and Isabella were now living. This wasn't coincidence, this wasn't random. I'd been brought here for a reason, and that reason was connected to the two people who'd destroyed my life. I walked back to the main room. Victor was gone. In his place was a single piece of paper on the desk. 3 words written in neat handwriting. "Now you understand." The next morning, I woke to the sound of my door opening. I shot up in bed, disoriented, as a woman in a gray suit stepped inside carrying a tray. "Breakfast," she said curtly, setting it on the desk without looking at me. "Mr. Grayson expects you in the study in 30 minutes. She left before I could respond. The food was simple, but deliberate. Oatmeal, black coffee, a single piece of wheat toast. Nothing excessive, nothing comforting. I ate mechanically, my mind still spinning from the previous night's discovery. Victor owned Derek's condo. That single fact had kept me awake until 3 in the morning, turning it over like a puzzle piece that didn't fit any picture I could imagine. When I entered the study, Victor was standing by a wall of monitors, each displaying different security camera feeds. I recognized some of the locations: the penthouse lobby, the parking garage, the elevator. Others showed places I didn't know: offices, restaurants, residential buildings. He didn't acknowledge me right away, just kept watching the screens with an expression that revealed nothing. "Sit," he finally said, gesturing to a leather chair. I sat. He turned to face me, hands clasped behind his back. "You found the property record." I nodded. "Good. That means you're paying attention. Now let me tell you what you haven't figured out yet." He moved to the desk and pulled up a file on his tablet, then turned it toward me. It showed a timeline, dates and events mapped out like a military operation. 6 months before Isabella left you, Derek Connors received a consulting contract from one of my subsidiary companies. The contract paid him 3 times his previous salary. In exchange, he was tasked with a single objective: get close to your wife. My blood ran cold. What? Victor's expression didn't change. Isabella wasn't chosen randomly, Alexander. She was identified as someone dissatisfied, someone looking for an exit. Derek was simply the vehicle. Charming, available, conveniently positioned in your life already. It took 8 months to fully turn her, longer than I expected, but the investment paid off. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in. You're saying you paid Derek to seduce my wife? Why? Why would you do that? Because I needed you, Victor said simply. Not the version of you that was comfortable and content. I needed you broken, desperate, and isolated. I needed you to have nothing left to lose. Only then could I know if you were the right person for what comes next. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You destroyed my marriage, my life, for what? Some kind of sick experiment? He remained calm, unmoved by my anger. Not an experiment. A test. And you passed the moment you signed that contract. You were supposed to walk away. Most people in your position would have. But you didn't. You stayed because you recognized something I was offering, the chance to stop being a victim. I wanted to hit him, I wanted to walk out and never come back. But my legs wouldn't move. Because underneath the rage, underneath the betrayal, was a terrible truth. He was right. I had stayed, not just because I needed money, but because some part of me wanted to know why this had happened. Wanted to understand the machinery that had ground my life to dust. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victor smiled, and for the first time, it looked almost genuine. I want you to help me take everything from the people who thought they could use you. Derek. Isabella. And the others you don't know about yet. But first, you need to understand how deep this goes. He pulled up another file. This one showed photographs, financial records, phone logs, all related to Isabella. She wasn't just unhappy, Alexander. She was recruited. 3 years ago, she attended a networking event for marketing professionals. She met a woman named Colleen Vireth, who worked for one of my companies. They became friends. Colleen introduced her to certain opportunities, certain people. Over time, Isabella's dissatisfaction with your marriage was cultivated, encouraged, amplified. By the time Derek entered the picture, she was already primed to leave. I stared at the documents, feeling sick. You've been watching us for 3 years? Longer, Victor said. But the active phase began 3 years ago. You were identified as a potential candidate shortly after your wedding. Why? I demanded. What makes me so special? Your background, Victor said. Orphaned at 16. Raised by your brother. No extended family. No deep social ties. You built your life from nothing, which means you understand what it's like to lose everything and survive. That resilience, combined with your recent public humiliation, made you ideal. I sank back into the chair, overwhelmed. This can't be real. People don't do this. People don't orchestrate someone's entire life just to recruit them. Victor leaned forward. You'd be surprised what people do when they have enough resources and motivation. I've spent 20 years building a network of individuals who've been broken by the systems they trusted. Some were betrayed by business partners, others by family members. A few, like you, by people they loved. Each one thought their suffering was random, personal. But it wasn't. It was engineered. He pulled up one more document. A list of names. 12 in total, including mine at the bottom. Subject profiles, psychological assessments, Recruitment timelines. My stomach turned. You've done this to 12 people? 15, actually, Victor corrected. 3 didn't make it past the initial assessment. But the others, they're all part of something larger now. Something you'll understand soon enough. I looked at the names again. Some I recognized from news articles, business scandals, public divorces. Others were unfamiliar. What happens to them? I asked. They work for me, Victor said. In various capacities. Some handle acquisitions. Others manage information networks. A few, like you, are being groomed for more specialized roles. Roles that require a particular kind of motivation. The kind that only comes from having nothing left to lose. I stood again, this time steadier. I'm not going to be your puppet. Victor nodded. I don't want a puppet. Puppets break too easily. I want a partner. Someone who understands that power isn't given, it's taken. Someone who's willing to use the tools I provide to reclaim what was stolen from them. He walked to the window, looking out over the city. In 3 days, there's a charity gala at the Belmont Estate. Derek and Isabella will be there. So will Cullen Vireth and several others involved in your recruitment. You'll attend as my assistant. You'll see them face to face. And you'll begin to understand exactly what we're going to do to them. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him to go to hell and walk out the door. But the image of Derek and Isabella together, smiling, living in a condo that Victor owned, spending money that came from destroying my life, it burned in my chest like acid. What's the end game? I asked. Victor turned back to me. The end game is simple. We take everything from them. The condo, the money, the reputation, everything they think they've built. And we do it legally, quietly, so thoroughly, that by the time they realize what's happening, it's too late to stop it. And you, Alexander, you're going to be the one who makes it happen. Because they'll never see you coming, not until it's already over. He extended his hand. So what do you say? Are you ready to stop being the victim and start being the architect? I stared at his hand for a long moment. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was wrong, that I should leave, that nothing good could come from this path. But the part of me that had spent 2 weeks sleeping on an air mattress, scrolling through social media posts of my ex-wife and former best friend living their best life, that part didn't care about right or wrong anymore. It cared about justice. Or maybe revenge. In that moment, I couldn't tell the difference. I shook his hand. The penthouse suddenly felt different. Not like a prison, but like a war room. And I'd just enlisted. The next 3 days moved like a countdown to something I couldn't fully see yet. Victor kept me busy with mundane tasks that felt deliberately designed to keep my mind occupied. Reviewing financial reports, organizing files, researching shell companies and their ownership structures. But underneath the routine work, I felt the weight of what was coming. The gala, seeing Derek and Isabella face to face for the first time since everything collapsed. Every morning started the same way. That woman in the gray suit, whose name I learned was Nadira, brought breakfast and a daily schedule. She never spoke beyond what was necessary. Never made eye contact longer than required. The other staff members I encountered were similarly detached. A security guard named Thomas, who monitored the elevator. A man named Vincent, who handled Victor's personal correspondence. All of them moved through the penthouse like ghosts, present but not really there. On the second day, I noticed something odd. I'd gotten up around 2 a.m, unable to sleep, and wandered into the kitchen for water. The penthouse was dark, except for the ambient city lights filtering through the windows. As I passed Victor's study, I noticed the door was slightly open. A blue glow emanated from inside. I should have kept walking, but curiosity pulled me forward. I peered through the crack. Victor sat at his desk, multiple monitors surrounding him, each displaying different surveillance feeds. But these weren't the building security cameras I'd seen before. These were personal spaces. Living rooms, bedrooms, offices. I recognized one immediately. It was Derek's condo. The camera angle showed the living room where Derek sat on the couch, laptop open, completely unaware he was being watched. Isabella walked past in the background, talking on her phone. Another monitor showed a different location. An office, upscale, with a woman I didn't recognize sitting at a desk. The timestamp in the corner indicated these were live feeds, not recordings. Victor wasn't just monitoring Derek and Isabella. He was watching multiple people in real time. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make noise. My heart hammered against my ribs. This went beyond preparation or research. This was systematic surveillance, on a scale that couldn't possibly be legal. I returned to my room and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every rational thought told me to leave, to walk out in the morning and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had grown cold and calculating over the past weeks, recognized something else. Victor had the resources to see everything, to know everything. If I was going to understand how deeply I'd been manipulated, if I was going to find out who else was involved, I needed access to that information, and the only way to get it was to stay close. The next morning, I asked Nadira a question. She was setting down my breakfast tray when I spoke. "How long have you worked for Mr. Grayson?" She paused, her hand still on the tray. "Long enough." That's not really an answer. She straightened and looked at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "Mr. Davis, everyone here has their reasons for staying. I suggest you focus on yours, and not worry about anyone else's." She left before I could respond. Later that afternoon, Victor called me into his study. He was reviewing documents on his tablet when I entered. The monitors I'd seen the night before were off now, or at least showing nothing but screensavers. "Sit," he said without looking up. I sat. "Tomorrow night's gala requires preparation. You'll need to understand the players involved." He pulled up a series of photographs on his tablet, then turned it toward me. The first image showed a woman in her early 40s, professionally dressed, with sharp features and calculating eyes. This is Kalen Vireth. She's the one who befriended Isabella 3 years ago. She works for one of my acquisitions firms, though she doesn't know I'm the one who ultimately controls it. He swiped to the next image. A man in his 50s, silver hair, expensive suit. This is Warren Kincaid. He runs the consulting firm where Derek supposedly works. In reality, the firm is a front for placing operatives in positions where they can gather information or influence targets. Derek thought he was being hired for legitimate consulting work. He had no idea his actual job was to seduce your wife. My jaw tightened. "So Derek doesn't know he was working for you?" Victor shook his head. "Not directly. The layers of separation are intentional. If anyone investigates, the trail goes cold, long before it reaches me. Derek believes he was simply recruited by a consulting firm that paid well. The assignment to get close to Isabella came from Warren, framed as client relationship building. Derek made his own choices after that. The rationalization didn't make it better. Derek still betrayed me, still looked me in the eye while sleeping with my wife. But knowing he'd been positioned to do it, that someone had identified Isabella as vulnerable and Derek as the right tool, that added a layer of manipulation that made my stomach turn. Victor continued, "At the gala, you'll see all of them. Kalen, Warren, Derek, Isabella, several others who played smaller roles. Your job is simple. Observe. Listen. Say nothing unless spoken to directly. I need you to see how they interact, how they behave when they think they're safe." I frowned. "Why does that matter?" "Because," Victor said, leaning forward, "they think they've won. They think the operation is complete, that you've been successfully removed from the board, and that they can move on to their next assignments. But what they don't know is that I've been documenting everything. Every payment, every communication, every illegal action taken to manipulate you. And tomorrow night we begin the process of turning their victory into their destruction." He stood and walked to the window. "The gala is more than a social event, Alexander. It's a gathering of people who believe they're untouchable, people who've spent years manipulating others for profit. Tomorrow night you'll see the machinery up close, and then you'll help me dismantle it piece by piece." I left the study with a folder containing profiles of everyone I'd encounter at the gala. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading through them. Kalen Vireth had orchestrated the collapse of 3 marriages before Isabella, each one targeting individuals who later became isolated and vulnerable. Warren Kincaid had placed operatives in over 20 companies, gathering insider information that Victor's firms used for hostile takeovers. Every person in these files had participated in destroying someone's life, and they'd all done it for money. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the surveillance feeds, about how many people were being watched right now without knowing it, about whether I was one of them. I got up and walked through the penthouse, checking corners for cameras. I found 3. One in the hallway outside my room, one in the kitchen, one in the main living area. They were small, barely noticeable, but once you knew what to look for, they were obvious. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. Victor had said he needed me broken and desperate. He'd engineered my wife's affair to make sure I had nothing left. But what if I wasn't the only one? What if everyone working for him had been manipulated the same way? What if Nadira, Thomas, Vincent, all of them had been broken by Victor's network before being offered a way to rebuild? The thought sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't joining a team. I was joining a collection of people who'd all been destroyed and then reshaped into tools. The morning of the gala, Nadira brought a garment bag along with breakfast. "Your attire for tonight," she said, hanging it on the closet door. "Mr. Grayson expects you ready by 6. I opened the bag after she left. Inside was a perfectly tailored black suit, white shirt, silk tie. Shoes that probably cost more than my rent used to. Everything fit perfectly because of course it did. Victor knew my measurements. He knew everything. At 5:30, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. I looked different. Not just the expensive clothes, but something in my face. The softness that used to be there, the openness, it was gone. Replaced by something harder. More guarded. I barely recognized myself. Victor was waiting in the main room when I emerged. He wore a charcoal suit and carried himself with the casual confidence of someone who knew he controlled every variable. "Good," he said, looking me over. "You look like you belong. Remember, tonight you observe. You say nothing about our arrangement. If anyone asks, you're my new executive assistant, nothing more." We took a private car to the Belmont estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The driveway was lined with luxury vehicles, valets in white jackets opening doors for guests in evening wear. Inside, the mansion was all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing in the corner of the main ballroom. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvre. Everyone looked wealthy, comfortable, untouchable. Victor moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, making small talk. I stayed 2 steps behind him, playing the role of assistant, watching everything. Then I saw them. Derek and Isabella stood near the bar, champagne glasses in hand, laughing at something someone had said. Isabella wore a red dress that I'd never seen before. Derek had his hand on her lower back, possessive and casual. They looked happy, genuinely happy, like they'd never destroyed anyone's life to get there. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Victor noticed. "Steady," he murmured without looking at me. "Not yet." We moved closer, circulating through the crowd until we were within earshot. I heard Isabella's laugh, that same musical sound that used to make me smile. Now it felt like glass breaking. Derek was telling a story about a business deal, embellishing details to make himself sound clever. The people around them were charmed, engaged, completely unaware of what he really was. Then Kalen Vireth appeared, gliding over to join their circle. She kissed Isabella on both cheeks, European style, then turned to Derek with a knowing smile. "You two look wonderful together," she said. "I'm so glad things worked out." Isabella beamed. "We are too. Best decision I ever made." Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger anymore. Something colder. More patient. Victor was right. They thought they'd won. Thought they were safe. They had no idea what was coming. The gala lasted another 2 hours, but I barely registered most of it. My focus stayed locked on Derek, Isabella, and Kalen as they moved through the crowd, laughing and networking like everything was simple. Like they hadn't carefully orchestrated the destruction of my marriage. Victor kept me close, introducing me to various people as his assistant, but never letting me engage in meaningful conversation. I was window dressing, a prop in whatever larger performance he was conducting. Near the end of the evening, Warren Kincaid approached our group. He was exactly as his photo suggested, polished and predatory, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Victor," he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you. I heard you brought new blood." Victor shook his hand. "Warren, meet Alexander Davis. He's been helping me streamline some operations." Warren's gaze swept over me with casual assessment. "Fresh faces are always valuable. How are you finding the work?" "Illuminating," I said carefully. Warren chuckled. "That's one word for it." He turned back to Victor. "We should talk next week about the Riverside acquisition. Some interesting developments." Victor nodded. "My office. Tuesday." Warren moved on, and I felt my pulse slow slightly. The casual mention of Riverside, a project I knew nothing about, reminded me how much was happening beneath the surface. How many operations Victor ran simultaneously? How many people were being manipulated at any given moment? As we were leaving, I caught one last glimpse of Derek and Isabella. They were saying goodbye to Colleen near the entrance. Derek's hand was on Isabella's shoulder, gentle and familiar. She leaned into him, comfortable, secure. They looked like any other couple in love. The image burned itself into my memory. Not because it hurt anymore, but because I wanted to remember exactly how confident they looked right now. I wanted to remember it when everything fell apart. The car ride back to the penthouse was silent. Victor stared out the window at the passing city lights, his expression unreadable. When we finally arrived and stepped into the elevator, he spoke. "What did you observe?" I considered the question. "They're comfortable. They think whatever they did is finished. They're not looking over their shoulders." "Good," Victor said. "That makes the next phase easier." The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse. "I need you to see something." We walked to his study. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick folder, easily 200 pages. "This," he said, setting it in front of me, "is everything. Every communication between Warren and Derek. Every meeting between Colleen and Isabella. Every payment made. Every instruction given. It's a complete record of the operation that destroyed your marriage." I opened the folder with shaking hands. The first page was an email from Warren to Derek, dated 15 months ago. Subject line read simply, "New assignment." The email detailed a target, a woman named Isabella Davis, described as maritally dissatisfied and professionally ambitious. It outlined an approach strategy. Casual encounter at industry event. Build rapport through shared interests. Gradually increase contact. The clinical language made my stomach turn. My wife had been reduced to a target profile. Derek's response email was enthusiastic. He called it an exciting opportunity and asked about compensation structure. There was no hesitation, no moral conflict, just business. I flipped through more pages, text messages between Colleen and Isabella, carefully guiding her dissatisfaction. "You deserve someone who challenges you. Marriage shouldn't feel like settling. Have you ever considered what you're missing?" Each message was designed to deepen Isabella's unhappiness, to make her question everything we'd built together. And Isabella had responded exactly as intended, slowly opening up about her frustrations, about feeling stuck, about wondering if there was something more. Then came the financial records. Payments from Warren's consulting firm to Derek, $50,000 initially, then monthly bonuses tied to milestones. First successful dinner, alone with Isabella, $5,000. First intimate encounter, $10,000. Moving in together, $25,000. My wife's affair had been a commissioned project with a detailed payment schedule. But the documents that made my blood run cold were the ones near the back of the folder. Communications I wasn't part of. Emails between Warren and Victor, discussing multiple simultaneous operations. Project Riverside. Project Thornhill. Project Davis. That was me. Listed alongside a dozen others. Each project targeted a specific individual, manipulated their relationships, and positioned them for recruitment. The operation that destroyed my marriage wasn't unique. It was one of many. I looked up at Victor. "You've done this to dozens of people," he nodded. 73, to be exact. Over the past 12 years. Some operations failed. Most succeeded. The ones that succeeded produced assets like you. People who understand betrayal intimately and are motivated to prevent it from happening to others. I felt sick. "You're describing a systematic program of destroying people's lives." Victor's expression didn't change. I'm describing a systematic program of identifying people who are already vulnerable and accelerating their inevitable collapse. The marriages I target are already failing. The friendships are already strained. I simply remove the uncertainty and create a controlled outcome. That doesn't make it right, I said. Victor smiled slightly. Right and wrong are luxuries for people who haven't been broken yet. You came here because you needed answers. Now you have them. The question is what you do with that knowledge. I stared at the folder. Every page was documentation of manipulation and betrayal. But it was also evidence. Evidence of conspiracy, fraud, potentially dozens of crimes. If this went to the authorities, Victor's entire operation would collapse. As if reading my mind, Victor spoke again. You're thinking about the police, about lawyers, about exposing this. He walked to the window. That folder represents 12 years of carefully documented crimes. If it were made public, everyone involved would face consequences. Warren, Colleen, Derek, dozens of others. But here's what you need to understand, Alexander. That folder exists because I want it to exist. I've kept meticulous records, not to hide my actions, but to ensure I control the narrative. If I'm ever threatened, that folder and many others like it become my insurance policy. He took a sip of his scotch. So the question, Alexander, is whether you can live with that, whether revenge is worth becoming the thing you hate. I looked down at the transfer agreement, at my name typed in neat letters, at the signature line waiting for my decision. Everything Victor said was true. Signing this would make me complicit, would turn me from victim into perpetrator. But as I sat there thinking about Derek's hand on Isabella's back, about Callan's knowing smile, about Warren's casual mention of me as new blood, I realized something. I had already made the decision. The moment I shook Victor's hand 3 days ago, the moment I agreed to attend the gala, the moment I read through that folder and felt satisfaction instead of horror, I was already complicit. Signing the document would just make it official. I picked up the pen. Victor watched me carefully. Are you sure? I met his eyes. They took everything from me. They destroyed my marriage, my home, my sense of trust. They did it for money, for fun, for sport. And they walked away laughing. So yes, I'm sure. I signed my name. The ink dried quickly. Victor took the document, added his signature below mine, then placed it in a folder marked Property Transfers, District 7. Done, he said simply. In 3 weeks, you'll receive the official transfer documents. 1 week after that, you'll serve eviction notice. And 30 days from then, Derek and Isabella will be standing on the street with nowhere to go and no one to blame but themselves. He raised his glass again. Welcome to the other side, Alexander. I finally drank. The scotch burned going down, but I barely felt it. All I felt was the cold certainty that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. And the terrible satisfaction that came with knowing Derek and Isabella had no idea what was coming. They thought they'd won. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The 3 weeks that followed the gala passed in a strange blur of routine and anticipation. Victor kept me busy with legitimate work, reviewing acquisition targets, analyzing market reports, attending meetings where I said nothing but absorbed everything. On the surface, I was settling into the role of executive assistant. Underneath, I was counting down to the moment when the transfer documents would arrive, and I could begin the process of dismantling Derek and Isabella's life. But Victor had taught me one thing very clearly. Nothing ever goes according to plan. And he was right. It started on a Tuesday morning. I woke to find Nadira standing in my doorway, her expression more tense than usual. Mr. Grayson needs to see you immediately. Not in the study. In the conference room. The shift in location felt significant. I dressed quickly and followed her down a hallway I'd never been permitted to enter before. The conference room was all glass and steel, with a long table and chairs that looked like they cost more than most people's cars. Victor sat at the head of the table. Beside him sat a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, wearing a gray suit and an expression of professional neutrality. Sit, Victor said. His tone was different, clipped, almost cold. I sat across from them. The woman opened a leather portfolio and pulled out several documents. Mr. Davis, my name is Evelyn Stroud. I'm the head of internal security for Mr. Grayson's Enterprises. We have a situation that requires immediate address. My stomach tightened. What situation? She slid a photograph across the table. It showed me, or at least it looked like me, entering a building I didn't recognize. The timestamp read 3 nights ago, 11:47 p.m. We have evidence, Evelyn continued, that you accessed a restricted server containing confidential client information. That server is maintained in our satellite office downtown. This photograph shows you entering that building after hours using a security credential that was reported missing 2 weeks ago. I stared at the photo. The person's build was similar to mine, wearing clothes that looked like something from my closet, but the image was grainy enough that facial features were indistinct. That's not me. I was here 3 nights ago. I went to bed at 10:30. Evelyn pulled out another document. We also have digital logs showing that confidential files were accessed and downloaded using your employee ID. Files related to ongoing operations, including detailed information about individuals in our recruitment pipeline. She paused. The download included the complete file on Derek Connors and Isabella Davis. Victor finally spoke. Alexander, I want to believe you. But the evidence is compelling. Your credential, your physical profile, your employee ID, and the files accessed were specifically the ones you'd have the most interest in compromising. I felt the room tilt. This is a setup. Someone is framing me. Why would I risk everything to download files I already have access to? You had supervised access, Evelyn corrected. These files were accessed without authorization and downloaded to an external device. That constitutes theft of proprietary information and breach of your employment contract. She pulled out a copy of the contract I'd signed 3 weeks ago. Per Section 12, subsection 4, any unauthorized access to confidential materials is grounds for immediate termination and potential legal action. Victor leaned back in his chair. I need to understand what happened, Alexander. If you took those files, if you're planning to expose this operation, or use the information for your own purposes, I need to know now. The walls felt like they were closing in. I could see where this was going. Someone had manufactured evidence to make it look like I'd gone rogue. Someone wanted me removed before I could move against Derek and Isabella. But who? And why now, just weeks before I was supposed to take ownership of the condo? I didn't take those files, I said, keeping my voice steady. I have no reason to. Everything I need is already available to me through proper channels. Someone is trying to sabotage me. Evelyn's expression didn't change. That's what someone who got caught would say. We'll need to conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, your access to all systems is suspended. You'll be moved to guest quarters and restricted from the main operational areas of the penthouse. If the investigation clears you, your privileges will be restored. If not, you'll face termination and possible prosecution. Victor stood. I'm sorry, Alexander, but I can't have security breaches. Not now. Not with so many operations in motion. You understand. I understood perfectly. This was a test, another one of Victor's manipulations to see how I'd react under pressure. Or it was someone else in his organization who saw me as a threat. Either way, I was being sidelined at the exact moment I was supposed to gain power. 2 security personnel I'd never seen before appeared at the door. They escorted me out of the conference room and down another hallway to a small suite that felt more like a hotel room than living quarters. 1 bed, 1 bathroom, no desk, no computer. A television mounted on the wall was the only amenity. You'll remain here until the investigation concludes, one of the guards said. Meals will be brought to you. No phone calls, no outside communication. He closed the door. I heard the lock engage from the outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, mind racing. The timing was too perfect. 3 weeks before the property transfer was supposed to finalize. 3 weeks before I could move against Derek and Isabella. Someone knew about the plan and was stopping it before it could happen. But who? Warren? Kalen? Someone else in Victor's network who saw me as competition? I stood and checked the room thoroughly. No obvious cameras, but that didn't mean they weren't there. The window didn't open. The door was solid and locked from the outside. I was effectively imprisoned. Hours passed. Nadira brought lunch on a tray, said nothing, and left. I tried to think through every interaction I'd had since arriving at the penthouse. Every person I'd met, Every conversation I'd overheard. Someone had access to my employee ID. Someone who could create a convincing forgery of my appearance. Someone who knew exactly which files to access to make it look like I was planning to betray Victor. Then it hit me. Vincent, Victor's correspondence manager. I'd seen him at his desk multiple times, surrounded by employee files and security credentials. He had access to everything. But why would he frame me? What did he gain from removing me from the operation? Unless he wasn't acting alone. Unless someone outside the organization had gotten to him. Paid him to sabotage me before I could become a threat. That evening, as the sun set and the room darkened, I heard voices in the hallway. Muffled but distinct. I pressed my ear against the door. It was Evelyn Stroud talking to someone. The digital forensics came back. The download was routed through 3 proxy servers, but the origin point traces back to his device. We have him. A pause. Then Victor's voice. And the files? Are they still secure? They were uploaded to a cloud storage account. We're working on accessing it now. If he distributed them to anyone, we'll know soon. Another pause. What do you recommend? Evelyn's response was cold and clinical. Termination. Immediate. File criminal charges for corporate espionage. Make an example of him so no one else in the organization gets ideas. I held my breath. Then Victor spoke again. Give me 24 hours. I want to talk to him first. If he can explain this, if there's any possibility he's being set up, I need to know before we pull the trigger. Evelyn didn't sound convinced, but she agreed. 24 hours. After that, I'm moving forward with or without your approval. Their footsteps faded down the hallway. I stepped back from the door, heart hammering. 24 hours. That's all I had to figure out who set me up and prove my innocence. But how? I had no access to computers. No way to investigate. No way to contact anyone who might help. I was trapped in a room with no resources and a ticking clock. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, mind working through possibilities. If Vincent was involved, he'd have left traces. Digital footprints that could be tracked if someone knew where to look. But I wasn't a hacker. I didn't have those skills. What I did have was knowledge of Victor's operation, knowledge of how he thought, how he tested people. This entire situation might be another manipulation, another way to see if I'd break under pressure, to see if I'd panic and confess to something I didn't do, or if I'd stay calm and think my way through it. If that was the case, then the cameras I couldn't see were watching me right now, analyzing my behavior, measuring my response. I sat up and looked directly at where a camera would most likely be hidden. If this is a test, I said aloud, then you already know I didn't access those files. You know someone set me up. The question is whether you care about the truth or just about control. Silence. No response. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Derek and Isabella were living in a condo they thought was theirs, spending money they thought was legitimate, building a life on foundations made of sand. And I was locked in a room, accused of crimes I didn't commit, watching my chance for justice slip away, the anger that had been simmering since the gala began to boil over. Not at Victor, not even at whoever framed me, but at myself, for believing that revenge could be clean, for thinking that I could use Victor's machinery without becoming part of it, for signing that contract and thinking I could control the outcome. I'd been so focused on destroying Derek and Isabella that I'd failed to see I was just another piece on Victor's board. Another asset to be used and discarded when convenient. The realization settled over me like cold water. I'd been played again. Not by my wife or my best friend this time, but by someone who'd promised me justice and delivered manipulation instead. The door lock clicked. I turned. Victor stood in the doorway alone. No guards, no Evelyn. Just him. We need to talk, he said. I didn't move from the window. About what? About how you set me up? About how this is another one of your tests? Victor stepped inside and closed the door behind him. This isn't a test, Alexander. Someone in my organization betrayed both of us. The evidence against you is real. Manufactured, but real. Someone went to significant effort to frame you and to access those files. The question is why? I turned to face him. You tell me. You're the one who monitors everything. Who has cameras everywhere? Who documents every operation? You should know exactly who did this. He walked to the window and stood beside me, both of us looking out at the city. I do know, he said quietly. That's why I'm here. The person who framed you is named Thomas Keller. He's one of my security personnel, the same guard who's been monitoring the elevators since you arrived. He was paid $50,000 by Warren Kincaid to sabotage your involvement in the Derek Connors operation. My breath caught. Warren? Why would he want to stop me? Victor's expression was grim, because Warren didn't know I was the one who ultimately controlled his firm. He thought he was working for a legitimate consulting company that happened to take on ethically questionable assignments. When he started piecing together that all his operations traced back to me, he panicked. He realized that if I had documentation of everything he'd done, I could destroy him whenever I wanted. So he decided to strike first, I said, by removing me before I could execute the property transfer. If I'm discredited, the transfer doesn't happen. Derek keeps the condo. Warren keeps his leverage over Derek. And you lose a piece on your board. Victor nodded. Exactly. Warren reached out to Thomas 3 weeks ago, offered him money and a position at a competitor firm if he'd help remove you from the equation. Thomas accepted. He manufactured the evidence, used your credentials to access the restricted server, and made it look like you were planning to expose the entire operation. I stared at Victor. And you knew this the whole time? He met my gaze, I suspected, but I needed to see how you'd react. Whether you'd panic, confess to something you didn't do, or stay calm and think your way through it. You did the latter. That tells me you're ready for what comes next. I felt exhausted, angry, hollow. Everything is a test with you. Even when I'm being framed for crimes I didn't commit, you're still evaluating me. Victor's expression didn't change. Yes, because in the world we operate in, threats don't announce themselves. They come from inside, from people you trust. I needed to know you could handle that reality. Now I do. He pulled a keycard from his pocket and handed it to me. Thomas and Warren are being dealt with as we speak. Your access is restored. The property transfer will proceed as planned. And in 3 days, you'll receive the documents showing you own Derek Connors' condo. I took the keycard, but didn't feel any sense of victory. Just a deep, bone-tired awareness that this path I'd chosen had no exit. That every step forward was another layer deeper into something I couldn't escape. What happens to Thomas and Warren? I asked. Victor walked to the door. They'll disappear. Not violently, just quietly removed from the board. New identities. New cities. With the understanding that if they ever resurface or speak about this operation, the evidence I have against them will destroy whatever lives they try to rebuild. He opened the door. Get some rest, Alexander. The real work begins soon. He left. I stood alone in the room that had been my prison for the past day, holding a keycard that represented my freedom. But freedom felt like the wrong word. I wasn't free. I was just deeper in the trap than before. And the worst part was knowing that I'd walked into it willingly, with my eyes open, because revenge had tasted sweeter than escape. I walked back to my original quarters. Everything was as I'd left it. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked tired, older. The innocence that had been there when I first arrived was completely gone now, replaced by something colder, something that understood how systems of power really worked. That understood you couldn't fight the machinery without becoming part of it. 3 days later, the transfer documents arrived. I signed them without ceremony, without celebration. Just a signature on a page that gave me ownership of the place where my ex-wife and former best friend thought they'd found happiness. The eviction notice was prepared and ready to be served. 30 days from delivery, they'd be homeless. The revenge I'd wanted was finally within reach. So why did it feel so hollow? The eviction notice sat on Victor's desk for 2 days, before I finally picked it up. It was a simple document, legal and sterile, outlining the terms by which Derek Connors and Isabella Davis would be required to vacate the property within 30 days of service. My property now. The irony wasn't lost on me. The home they'd built on the ruins of my marriage was never really theirs. They'd been living in a structure I now controlled, sleeping in beds I could remove, cooking in a kitchen I owned. Everything they thought was solid had always been an illusion. Victor entered the study as I held the notice. "Ready?" he asked. I looked up at him. The past month had changed how I saw him. Not as a villain anymore, but as something more complex. An architect of controlled chaos who believed he was creating order from pain. I didn't agree with his methods, but I understood them now in a way I hadn't when I first arrived. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. He nodded. "The process server will deliver it this afternoon, 3 p.m. They'll both be home." I made sure of it. Of course he did. Victor controlled variables. It's what made him effective and dangerous in equal measure. "But there's something else," Victor continued. "Something you need to see before the notice is served." He pulled up his tablet and turned it toward me. On the screen was a video feed, live, from inside Derek's condo. The camera angle showed the living room. Derek sat on the couch, phone pressed to his ear, his expression tense. Isabella paced near the window, arms crossed, clearly agitated. Victor unmuted the audio. Derek's voice came through, strained and defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've done everything exactly as instructed. Why would the firm suddenly close? There has to be some mistake." The voice on the other end was muffled, but the tone was final. Derek's face went pale. "But the car loan, the contract stated it wouldn't be called until—" He stopped mid-sentence, listening. His hand started shaking. "That's impossible. I can't pay that back in 30 days. I don't have that kind of capital." Isabella stopped pacing and looked at him. "What's wrong?" Derek lowered the phone slowly. "The consulting firm is being dissolved. They're calling in all outstanding loans immediately. The car, the equipment loans, everything. I have 30 days to pay back $170,000 or they take it all." Isabella's face shifted from concern to alarm. "What? How is that even legal?" Derek stood, running his hand through his hair. "There was a clause in the contract. I didn't read it carefully enough. If the firm dissolves for any reason, all debts become immediately due." He looked at her. "I thought we were secure. I thought this job was stable." Isabella sank onto the couch. Her voice was small, almost childlike. "What are we going to do?" Victor muted the audio and turned off the screen. "The first domino," he said quietly. "Warren's firm closed this morning. All the operatives he had placed in various companies, including Derek, are now scrambling. Most of them have similar debt structures. Most of them will collapse within 60 days. And they'll never know it was orchestrated." I stared at the blank screen. Part of me felt satisfaction seeing Derek panic, seeing the security he'd stolen from me evaporate in real time. But another part, smaller and quieter, felt something else. Not quite pity, but an awareness that Derek had been used just as thoroughly as I had. He'd thought he was being clever, taking a high-paying job and pursuing a woman he found attractive. He didn't know he was a tool in someone else's operation. Just like I hadn't known, the difference was I'd figured it out. Derek never would. At 3 p.m. exactly, my phone buzzed. A text from Victor. Notice served. Both subjects present. Reactions being monitored. I was in my quarters when it happened, but Victor had given me access to the surveillance feed. I pulled it up on my laptop. The video showed a man in a suit standing at Derek's door, clipboard in hand. Derek answered, confused. The process server handed him the envelope, stated his purpose, and left. Derek stood in the doorway holding the envelope like it might explode. He walked back inside, tore it open, and read. His face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, horror, understanding. Isabella came up behind him. "What is it?" Derek's voice was hollow. "It's an eviction notice. We have 30 days to leave." Isabella grabbed the notice from his hands and read it herself. Her face went white. "This says the property ownership was transferred, It says we've been living here under false pretenses. It says the original sale had contingencies we violated. She looked up at Derek. How is this possible? You said you bought this place. You said it was ours. Derek sank onto the couch. I did buy it. There was a contract. A deed. I own this place. He grabbed his laptop and started frantically searching through files. But as he pulled up documents, I could see his expression change. The contract he'd signed wasn't a standard purchase agreement. It was a conditional sale with reversion clauses. Clauses that Victor had designed specifically to take the property back whenever he wanted. I thought I bought this, Derek said, more to himself than to Isabella. But I didn't. I was just renting it from someone who could take it back any time they wanted. Isabella's voice rose. Who? Who owns it now? Derek found the name on the eviction notice. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he showed Isabella. The color drained from her face completely. Alexander? She whispered. Your ex-husband? That's impossible. He was broke. He was sleeping on his brother's couch. How could he possibly own this place? Derek shook his head slowly. I don't know. But his name is right here. Legal ownership transferred 2 weeks ago. We've been served notice by his attorney. This is real. Isabella stood abruptly and started pacing again, her movements jerky and panicked. This has to be a mistake. Some kind of fraud. We need to call a lawyer. We need to fight this. Derek looked at the notice again, reading the fine print. According to this, the original purchase agreement I signed had a fraud clause. If the property was acquired through any misrepresentation, ownership reverts to the original owner. He looked up at Isabella. Did you ever wonder how I afforded this place? On a consultant's salary? Isabella stopped pacing. What are you saying? Derek's voice cracked. I'm saying someone set this up. Someone wanted us here. In this specific condo. Living this specific life. And now they're taking it all back. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. I thought I was being smart, taking a great job, pursuing someone I cared about, building a life. But I was just playing a role someone else wrote. Isabella joined him at the window. Her voice was smaller now, scared. What do we do? Derek didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, I don't know. I turned off the feed. I'd seen enough. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was just a cold awareness that I'd become exactly what Victor had designed me to be. Someone who could watch other people's lives collapse and feel nothing but clinical detachment. 2 days later, Victor called me into the conference room. The same one where I'd been accused of corporate espionage. This time, Evelyn Stroud was there again, but her expression was different. Less hostile. Almost respectful. Mr. Davis, she said, we've completed our internal investigation. Thomas Keller has been removed from the organization. Warren Kincaid's firm has been dissolved. All evidence of your alleged security breach has been examined and determined to be fabricated. You're cleared of all charges. She slid a document across the table. This is a formal apology and a revised employment contract. Your position has been elevated to Senior Operations Director. Your compensation has been increased accordingly. I looked at the contract without touching it. What does Senior Operations Director actually mean? Victor answered. It means you'll oversee the execution of complex acquisitions. You'll manage assets like Derek and Isabella. You'll ensure that operations run smoothly and that targets are properly positioned for maximum effect. You'll do for others what was done to you, but with full knowledge and control. I stared at him. You want me to destroy other people's lives? Victor shook his head. I want you to accelerate the collapse of relationships that are already failing, to create opportunities for people who've been victimized to rebuild, just like you're doing. The rationalization was smooth, practiced, and completely hollow. I picked up the contract and read through it carefully this time. The compensation was substantial, 6 figures annually. Benefits, stock options. Everything someone in my position a year ago would have killed for. But the price was clear. I'd become part of the machinery. One of the operators who identified vulnerable people and pushed them over the edge. I thought about Derek sitting in that condo, realizing he'd never actually owned anything. I thought about Isabella, understanding that the man she'd left me for couldn't provide the security she'd wanted. I thought about how satisfying it should feel to watch them suffer the way I'd suffered, but all I felt was tired. I looked up at Victor. And if I say no? If I walk away right now? Victor's expression didn't change. Then you forfeit the property transfer. Derek keeps the condo. Isabella keeps her job. Everything returns to how it was before you signed that first contract. You'll leave with nothing. Just like you arrived. Except now you know how the machinery works. You know how people like them operate. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd had the courage to see it through. The choice was clear. Sign and become part of something dark but powerful. Walk away and return to being a victim with knowledge but no agency. Neither option felt right. Neither option felt like justice. But then I thought about something Victor had said weeks ago. Power isn't about what you have. It's about what you're willing to do to get it back. I had already done so much. Already crossed so many lines. Walking away now wouldn't erase those choices. It would just make them meaningless. I picked up the pen. Before I sign, I need something from you. Victor leaned forward slightly. What? I want full access to the documentation on every operation you've run, every person you've recruited, every target you've manipulated. I want to know exactly how deep this goes and who else is involved. And I want the ability to make my own decisions about which operations I participate in. I won't be a mindless tool. If I'm going to be part of this, it's on my terms. Victor studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled. That's why I chose you. Not because you'd follow orders blindly, but because you'd eventually demand autonomy. He extended his hand. Agreed. Full access. Full autonomy. But understand that once you sign that contract, you can't undo what you learn. You can't unknow what you discover. And you can't walk away without consequences. I shook his hand. I understand. I signed the contract. Evelyn witnessed it and countersigned. Victor took the document and placed it in a folder marked Senior Operations, Class A Personnel. Welcome to the inner circle, Alexander. Now let's finish what we started. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the condo building where Derek and Isabella lived. In my hand was a final notice. The 30-day period had expired. They'd failed to vacate. Now I had the legal right to forcibly remove them. The process server had tried to deliver it that morning, but no one answered the door. So I'd come myself. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see their faces. Wanted them to know who was responsible for their collapse. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked to their door. Unit 47. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Movement inside. Then the door opened. Isabella stood there, and for a moment neither of us spoke. She looked different, thinner. Her hair wasn't styled. No makeup. She wore sweatpants and an oversized shirt, clothes I'd never seen her in when we were married. She stared at me like I was a ghost. Alexander? Her voice was hoarse. What are you doing here? I held up the notice. You didn't vacate. The 30 days are up. I'm here to ensure compliance with the eviction order. Her eyes widened. You're actually going through with this? You're really going to throw us out? I stepped inside without waiting for permission. The condo looked different than it had on the surveillance feeds. Boxes were stacked in corners. Furniture had been moved. They'd been trying to pack but clearly hadn't finished. Derek emerged from the bedroom. He stopped when he saw me. His expression shifted from surprise to something harder. Anger mixed with humiliation. You, he said, you did this. Somehow you orchestrated all of it. The firm closing. The loans being called. The property transfer. This was you. I met his gaze steadily. No, Derek. This was you. You made the choice to take money to seduce my wife. You made the choice to destroy my marriage. You made the choice to build your life on foundations you didn't own. I just removed the scaffolding. Isabella moved between us. We didn't know, she said desperately. We didn't know any of this was planned. We thought we were making our own choices. We thought we fell in love naturally. I looked at her, this woman I'd spent 5 years with. This woman who'd told me I was too comfortable, too boring, not enough. You did make choices. I said quietly. You chose to believe someone who told you that you deserved more than what we had. You chose to walk away instead of trying to fix what was broken. Those were your choices. The consequences are just catching up to you now. Derek's hands clenched into fists. So what? You get your revenge and we end up on the street? That's justice to you? I pulled out my phone and opened a document. Sent it to both of their email addresses. That's not the full story, I said. You have two options. Option 1. You fight this eviction. You hire lawyers. You drag this through court. You'll lose, because the contract you signed is airtight, and you'll end up bankrupt and homeless in about 6 months. I paused. Option 2. You accept what's happened. You vacate today, and you take the settlement I'm offering. They both pulled out their phones and opened the email I'd sent. It was a financial agreement. In exchange for voluntary immediate vacation and signing non-disclosure agreements about everything that had happened, I was offering them enough money to start over. Not extravagantly, but enough for first and last month's rent somewhere modest. Enough to survive while they rebuilt. Isabella looked out from her phone, confused. Why would you give us anything? You hate us. I considered the question. A month ago, I would have said yes. I hated you both. I wanted you to suffer the way I suffered. But I've learned something since then. Revenge doesn't actually fix anything. It just makes you into someone you don't recognize. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The same view they'd enjoyed while I slept on an air mattress. I'm not doing this because I forgive you. I'm doing it because I don't want to become the kind of person who destroys people for sport. You were both used. Just like I was. The difference is, I figured out how the machinery works. You never will. And maybe that's punishment enough. Derek stared at the settlement offer. This is real? You're actually offering us a way out? I nodded. The money will be transferred today if you sign the agreements and leave the keys. You'll have 72 hours to collect your belongings from storage. After that, we never see each other again. No contact. No social media. You disappear from my life completely. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I did this. For hurting you. I looked at her. Your apology doesn't change anything. But I accept that you're sorry. That's more than I expected. Derek set down his phone. We'll take the settlement. We'll sign whatever you need. Just give us a few hours to pack the essentials. I handed him a card. My attorney's contact information. Call him when you're ready to sign. The money will transfer immediately. They both nodded. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back. One more thing. The people who set all of this up, who paid Derek to pursue you, Isabella, who engineered everything that happened, they're still out there, still doing this to other people. If you ever want to do something that actually matters, that actually helps someone, remember that. Remember that you are tools in someone else's game, and maybe find a way to stop it from happening to others. I left before either of them could respond. As I rode the elevator down, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace exactly, but a kind of resolution. I'd had my moment of power, my chance to make them suffer. And I'd chosen something different. Not mercy exactly, but pragmatism. A recognition that perpetuating the cycle Victor had created wouldn't heal anything. It would just create more broken people who'd eventually need to be broken again to serve some larger purpose. When I returned to the penthouse, Victor was waiting. How did it go? He asked. I handed him my key card to the building. They're taking the settlement. They'll be out today. Victor raised an eyebrow. You gave them money? That wasn't part of the plan. I know, I said. But I changed the plan. Consider it my first act of autonomy as senior operations director. Victor studied me carefully. Then he smiled. Interesting. Most people in your position would have taken the full measure of revenge. You chose restraint. That's either wisdom or weakness. Time will tell which. Maybe it's both, I said. Maybe that's what makes me useful to you. Someone who understands how the machinery works but isn't completely consumed by it. Victor nodded slowly. Perhaps you're right. He turned toward his study. Come. We have other operations to discuss. Other people who need our attention. I followed him, knowing that I had just stepped fully into the role he'd designed for me. Not as a victim anymore, not as a tool, but as someone who understood power and chose how to use it. Whether that made me better or worse than the people who destroyed my marriage, I honestly couldn't say. But it made me something different. Something that could exist in Victor's world without being destroyed by it. And for now, that would have to be enough. 4 months had passed since Derek and Isabella signed the settlement agreements and disappeared from my life. 4 months since I'd officially become Senior Operations Director in Victor's organization. 4 months of learning just how deep the machinery went and how many people were caught in its gears at any given moment. The work was exactly what Victor had promised. Complex, morally ambiguous, and disturbingly effective. I'd overseen 3 operations in that time, each one targeting individuals whose relationships were already fracturing, accelerating their collapse in ways that looked natural from the outside. But something had changed in how I approached the work. Unlike Victor, who viewed every operation with clinical detachment, I'd started implementing modifications. Exit packages for targets who cooperated. Counseling resources buried in settlement agreements. Small acts of mercy that Victor tolerated because the operations still succeeded. He'd been right about one thing. I understood how the machinery worked, but I was learning to use that knowledge differently than he'd intended. Tonight was different, though. Tonight wasn't about work. Victor had invited me to a fundraiser at the Ashton Cultural Center, a charity event benefiting mental health services. The irony wasn't lost on me, given what our organization actually did to people's mental health. But Victor moved in these circles, maintaining his public image as a philanthropic investor, while privately orchestrating the collapse of carefully selected individuals. I wore a tailored suit, navy blue, and arrived at the cultural center just after 7. The venue was elegant, all marble columns and soft lighting, with a string quartet playing near the entrance. Guests mingled with champagne glasses, discussing art and politics and whatever else people with money talked about when they gathered. Victor found me near the bar. He looked comfortable here, at ease in a way he never quite was in the penthouse. "This is your world now too," he said, gesturing at the crowd. "People with power and resources. People who shape narratives and control outcomes. You belong here as much as anyone." I wasn't sure I agreed, but I'd learned when to keep my thoughts to myself. We moved through the crowd, Victor introducing me to various people. Business owners, politicians, nonprofit directors. Everyone smiled and shook hands and said the right things. No one knew what Victor really did. No one suspected the man funding mental health services was also systematically breaking people's minds. Then I saw her, standing near the silent auction tables, examining a piece of art. Isabella. She looked different again. Her hair was shorter, styled simply. She wore a modest black dress, nothing like the designer clothes she used to favor. She seemed smaller somehow, like she'd folded in on herself. My first instinct was to leave, to avoid the confrontation entirely. But something kept me rooted. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need for one final interaction to close this chapter completely. I walked over slowly. She didn't notice me at first, focused on the auction catalog in her hands. When I stopped beside her, she looked up. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something more complex. Not quite fear. Not quite shame. Something in between. "Alexander," she said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to see you either. Are you doing okay?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She set down the catalog. "I'm surviving. Derek and I aren't together anymore. We lasted about 6 weeks after we left the condo. Turns out when you remove all the external factors, there wasn't much substance underneath." She looked back at the art. "I got a job. Nothing glamorous. Administrative work at a nonprofit downtown. The pay is terrible, but the work feels meaningful. I'm in therapy twice a week, trying to understand why I made the choices I made." I nodded. "That's good. Therapy helps." She met my eyes. "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to say it anyway. What happened, everything that fell apart, it wasn't just about you being comfortable or boring or any of the things I said. I was looking for something external to fix something internal. I thought a new relationship would make me feel alive, but all it did was show me how disconnected I was from myself." The words sounded rehearsed, like something her therapist had helped her articulate. But they also sounded genuine. "I'm glad you're figuring that out," I said. She looked down at her hands. "The settlement you gave us, it saved my life. Literally, I was in a dark place after everything collapsed. I had nothing. No job, no home, no relationship. That money gave me enough breathing room to get help instead of spiraling completely. So thank you. Even though you had no reason to help me. I didn't do it for you," I said honestly. "I did it because I didn't want to become someone who destroys people just because I can." She nodded slowly. "I understand. Still, it mattered." We stood in silence for a moment, the string quartet playing softly in the background. Then Isabella said something that surprised me. "The people who set everything up, who paid Derek to pursue me, do you know who they were?" I hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been thinking about it for months. About how we were both manipulated. About how many other people might be going through the same thing right now. And I want to do something about it. I want to expose them." She looked at me directly. "I know you know who they are. I know you have information. If there's any part of you that wants to stop this from happening to other people, help me." The request hung in the air between us. This was exactly what Victor had warned me about. Targets who got too close to understanding the machinery, who started asking dangerous questions. The protocol was clear. Shut it down, redirect, ensure silence. But looking at Isabella, seeing genuine determination in her eyes instead of the shallow ambition that used to define her, I felt something shift. Maybe it was exhaustion from living in Victor's world. Maybe it was recognition that the cycle needed to break somewhere. Maybe it was just the simple fact that she was right. This did need to stop. "I can't help you the way you're asking," I said carefully. "But I can tell you this. Document everything. Every strange interaction you had before Derek came into your life. Every person who seemed to be guiding your decisions. Every financial transaction that didn't quite make sense. Build a case based on what you experienced directly, not on speculation. And if you get enough evidence, take it to someone who can actually do something with it. A journalist, maybe. Or law enforcement." She studied my face. "You're part of it now, aren't you? You work for them." I didn't answer directly. "Just know that if you go down this path, you'll be putting yourself at risk. People who threaten this organization tend to disappear. Not violently, but thoroughly. New identities. New cities. Erased from the board. Make sure you're ready for that before you start digging." Isabella's expression hardened. "I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid of losing it again. Not if it means stopping this from happening to someone else." She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "If you ever change your mind, if you ever want to be part of taking them down instead of propping them up, call me." I took the card but didn't commit to anything. She nodded once, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there holding her card, feeling the weight of the choice she'd laid out. Stay in Victor's world, comfortable and powerful, but complicit in ongoing harm. Or risk everything to break the machinery from the inside. Neither option was clean. Neither option was simple. Victor appeared beside me. "Saw you talking to Isabella Davis. Everything okay?" I pocketed the card. "Fine. Just closing an old chapter." He studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Good. Because we have new operations starting next week, 3 new candidates identified, all in similar positions to where you were a year ago. I need you to oversee their recruitment." I nodded, but something in my chest felt tight. "How many more?" I asked. "How many more people do we need to break before this organization has enough assets?" Victor's smile faded slightly. "As many as it takes to maintain control. This is how power works, Alexander. You dismantle existing structures and rebuild them in your image. You know this. You've seen it work." I looked around the fundraiser. All these people with their champagne and their charity, none of them knowing that the man funding their mental health initiatives was also creating the patients who'd need those services. The hypocrisy was staggering. And I was part of it now, part of the machinery that ground people down and then offered them just enough support to keep functioning. Victor's voice broke through my thoughts. "You're having doubts. That's natural. But remember what they did to you. Remember how it felt to have everything stripped away? We're not the villains here, Alexander. We're the ones who understand how the game really works. But what if I don't want to play the game anymore? I asked quietly. What if I want to break it instead? Victor's expression went cold. Then you'd be making a very serious mistake. Everything you have, your position, your resources, your knowledge, it all exists because I allow it to exist. If you threaten this organization, you become just another problem to be managed. And I'm very good at managing problems. The threat was clear. But so was the choice. I could stay comfortable, stay powerful, and continue helping Victor break people. Or I could risk everything to try to stop it. Standing there in that elegant fundraiser, surrounded by people who had no idea what darkness lurked beneath the surface, I made my decision. I pulled out Isabella's card and looked at it one more time. Then I looked at Victor. I need some air, I said. Victor nodded. Don't be long, we have people to meet. I walked out of the cultural center and into the cool night. The city spread out before me, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives. How many of them were being manipulated right now? How many were being positioned for collapse? How many would end up broken and desperate, recruited into an organization they didn't understand? I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Isabella. I'm in. Let's take them down. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I turned off my phone, took a deep breath, and walked back inside. Not because I was returning to Victor's world, but because I needed to gather everything I'd learned, every document I'd seen, every operation I'd overseen. I needed to become the thing Victor feared most, an insider who understood the machinery well enough to dismantle it. The next few months would be dangerous, maybe deadly. But for the first time since my marriage collapsed, I felt like I was making a choice that actually mattered. Not revenge, not power, but justice. Real justice. The kind that stopped the cycle instead of perpetuating it. As I re-entered the fundraiser and saw Victor across the room, still smiling and shaking hands, I understood something fundamental. He'd broken me to rebuild me in his image. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd given me access to everything, taught me how the machinery worked, shown me every weak point in the system. And now I was going to use that knowledge to bring it all down. Starting tonight. Have you ever had to choose between comfort and doing what's right, even when the cost was everything you'd rebuilt? Let me know in the comments. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.